Greetings, humans, and welcome back. I'm Joey Pigtails, and this is vlog number 21, where I attempt my $200 to $2,000 challenge at Orange City Racing and Card Club on Saturday, July 27th. If you played with me that day, let me know in the comments which seat you were in and what timestamp you see yourself. Before we get into the hands, let's talk about that thumbnail real quick. If you remember in vlog 20, I included most of the hands I folded in between the hands I talked about. On Saturday, I posted this poll asking all of you how you felt about showing the hands I folded during the session. You can see the results right here, and we'll talk about them after the hands. So the very first comment I received on this poll, which I went ahead and removed since it was sort of toxic, essentially said the following: "I don't like polls, and I can't dismiss yours from my feed. Take it down or I'll unsub." I don't have a lot of experience dealing with toxicity yet, since my channel is still pretty small, but I leaned into my recent readings about Stoicism and responded thusly: "I appreciate the time you've spent here, and I understand that you have to go. Be a good human, and I highly recommend reading about Stoicism." We always have a choice about how to respond to everything, if we choose to respond at all. I could have responded aggressively or negatively, or I could have just deleted the comment and not thought about it anymore as well, but I still felt the need to respond to this faceless user whom I'll probably never meet, and perhaps my response to their concern will spark a new perspective in their worldview. Or maybe it won't. But my nature is to want to inspire others to be better humans, and in turn become a better human through those interactions myself. Anywho, this was a really long session, which is why I'm not including the hands I folded. It still takes a bit of work to include them, and I'd rather focus on the hands we can learn from. On that note, I'm going to be using more technical keywords in some of my hand discussions on the vlog, so take note of some of those concepts like rundowns, gappers, double suited, and others, and I'll talk about why this is important after the hands. Let's get into it. I've limp folded a bunch of hands up to this point and have been playing passively as the hands have been mediocre at best, so when I see double suited queens, I decide to open them to $20 over limp. But I'm wanting to get involved, so we go three ways to this flop of 3, 5, 10, 2 hearts. Yuck. I check, the next player fires half pot, the other player quickly calls, and I don't have much here, so I fold. Here we go, super premium hand alert. Aces and tens with nut diamonds. There's two limps to me, and I go ahead and open a 25, which sees the big blind and the player on my right call. With $80 in, we see a flop of Jack Queen 4 rainbow. I flop an overpair, a gut shot to the nuts, a backdoor flush draw, and I'm heavily blocking straight draws. I'm first to act and pot it. It's folded to the player on my right, who puts me all in, and I can't fold for 45 more. The board runs out 2 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, and I'm left with 1 pair, and the opponent ended up rivering 2 pair with Jack 10-9-7. Alright, bullet number 2 incoming. Here's a great learning example. There are a couple of limps to me. I limp with this monstrosity of a hand, and we go 6 ways to a flop of 6, 2, Jack, 2 clubs. Hair and a flush draw? Alright. We see a bet of 30, and I go ahead and make the call. With a turn of the queen of diamonds, my hand is now improved a little. The opponent pots it, and I go ahead and jam for a little bit more, which, of course, he calls. The river is the jack of spades, and our opponent announces quads. It's like that. Up to this point, you've seen me make some rather questionable plays, the results of which have me a bit frustrated and lead me here. We see 5 limps before it gets to me in the small blind, which seems to be the only seat I can get a hand in, and I see double suited aces and diamonds and spades. I pot it to 40, and the player on my left jams. Hell yeah! It's folded around to me, and I stick my stack in. Now, I want to explain my mindset at this moment in time, as it wasn't healthy. I only brought 3 bullets with me this session, and I was on the last one, so I started thinking about all the ways in which I could lose this hand. Like a monotone club or heart flop, or the other player having ace-ace as well and hitting 2 pair trips with their danglers. I was focused on the ways I was going to lose, and not on winning this hand and moving forward. So when the Queen Jack 3 all heart flop came out, my heart sank. The board ran out 5 of diamonds, 10 of hearts, and that's not good either. Not good at all. Thankfully, my opponent had double-suited kings, but not in the heart variety, and they failed to make more than the pair, so I scooped this pot, and I can now breathe a little easier. Here's a Bombpot to kick off being moved to the main game now that a 2-5 has opened. I look down at Ace King Queen 8 with nut spades, and we see flops of Queen Jack 8-2 spades on top and Ace Jack 9 rainbow on bottom. I flopped hard but not nutted on top, and top with a gut shot on bottom. It's checked around to a player who jams for $69, and I have a clear continue, but I'm not interested in blowing people out of the pot here as I have a chance to scoop this, so I go ahead and call, as do two other players, which is good to see. With turn cards of the 6 of spades on top and the 6 of diamonds on bottom, I have the nuts on top and still have equity on the bottom. It's checked around to me, and I jam, and both players make the call. The rivers are both ducks, changing nothing, and I end up chopping this pot. I didn't see what won the other board. Let me know if you can make it out from the footage. In the next hand, I see a nice double-suited double gapper, Queen 10-8-7 and hearts and spades. There are a few limps, and I go ahead and limp too, although we can probably and should probably open this hand. With a flop of 9-10-6, 2 diamonds, 1 heart, I flop a nut straight with a higher straight redraw, but I'm not blocking the flush draw. When checked to me, I go ahead and pot it for 20, which sees 1 call. The turn is the 8 of hearts, which is both good and bad for me. It makes my straight number 2 now, which is bad, but it also brings in an open-ended straight flush draw for me. We both check the turn, although I should probably stay on the gas pedal here. The river is the 8 of diamonds, giving me a full house, and now my opponent bets $30 with about $100 behind. Honestly, this bet confused me a little. I expected him to check fold to my bet, and while a lead here can be a bluff, I expect a bet to be some sort of value hand. I go ahead and shrug call and let him know I have a boat, and he folds. There have been quite a few hands like this one. I limp or open, flop hard, bet and take it, or I open or call and fold the flop bets. These hands keep happening, but there really isn't much to talk about with these, so I'm not going to be including the vast majority of them. In the next hand, I open a 30 over a couple of limps with King Queen 10-9 double suited and hearts and clubs. You guys know how I love these double suited single gapper hands. One player only has $22 total, so he goes all in, and we end up going 5 ways to a flop of Jack 9-5 rainbow. There we go. A pair and a wrap with backdoor flush draws. It's checked around to me, and I want to get all the money in there, so I go ahead and pot it to 145, but everyone else folds. I end up banking the straight on the turn and scoop this pot. The all-in player ended up having a pretty massive hand, and he had double-suited aces with 2 other Broadway cards, so we got pretty lucky to win this pot. The next hand is a $15 Bombpot, and I'm acting first. With flops of 5-5-7, 2 diamonds on top, and 8-9 Jack, 2 clubs on bottom, I flop strong on both boards, but as you can see, we aren't nutted on either. Chances are we are ahead on one board versus one player, so I go ahead and check to evaluate, and it's checked around to a late position player who bets $100. I don't want to blow people out of the pot here, so I call, and sadly, it's just the 2 of us. The turns are the 4 diamonds on top, giving me a boat, and the 6 of spades on bottom, making that board uglier. Being heads up and not having the nuts on either board, I go ahead and take the fold equity and jam as a semi-bluff, but my opponent is sticky and makes the call. The rivers run out the 4 of spades on top and the 10 of spades on bottom, and I roll my hand over. Our opponent shows ace 6 5 2 with 4 clubs for trip 5s on top and a busted club draw on the bottom, and I end up scooping this $950 pot to get unstuck on the session and into Profitville. Oh yeah. The next hand, the double straddle of $10 is on, and I call, as do 3 other players, to go 5 ways to a flop of ace 5 Jack rainbow. Top 2 pair, baby. Our villain from the Bombpot hand now leads for $30. Now, I don't expect this player to be very strong here, as he was the straddle and checked pre-flop, so I go ahead and call to evaluate, as does our friend Harry in the small blind. The turn is the 4 of hearts, which brings in a wheel, and it's checked to the aggressor, who is now all in for $75. Harry looks uninterested, so I go ahead and make the call, and we're heads up to the river of the King of Diamonds. Our opponent rolls over 2, 3, 4 king, so he ended up flopping a small wrap and binked that on the turn, and I was drawing to a boat. In the next hand, I see a nice single gap rundown with one suit, Jack 1087. These hands are nice, especially containing Jack 10, which lets us make a variety of nutted straights, including Broadway. There's a straddle to $5 and a limp, and I open to 25. I see 3 calls to a flop of Jack 7-4 Rainbow. I flop top 2 and a gut shot, which is pretty good for this hand. It's checked to me, and I bet 80, which is enough to, if called, to put players all in on the turn. The button calls, and the other players fold. The turn is the 2 of spades, which is about as clean as I can ask for. I go ahead and put my opponent all in for his last $80, and he calls to see a river of the 6 of clubs. I roll my 2 pair over, and our opponent had flopped a wrap with 6, 5, 3, 2, turned a pair and more straight outs, and then binked the straight on the river. Now, this is one of the worst double-suited rundown hands you can have, but I've been battling some tilt the last hour or so, and this hand still has some possibilities, so I play it for a limp with just about everyone else. With $35 in, we see a flop of 4, 10, 5, 2 clubs. I've got 2 pair and a gut shot. You know, a monster. There's a lead for 25 from the player on my right, and I go ahead and make the call as I get the feeling our opponent is weak or has some sort of draw. The turn is the 2 of diamonds, and I now have a mirror and a straight flush draw. The opponent now flicks 2 green chips in, and I'm starting to correlate his nonverbals and betting patterns, and his actions here look weak, so I go ahead and call again to evaluate, as he's done this with 1 pair type hands and draws before. The river is the queen of hearts, and it just isn't that great of a card, as 2 pair type hands now will get there. When he checks the river, I don't expect to get called by worse hands, and I suppose I can bet to not have to show my hand if I'm ahead, but I go ahead and take my showdown value and announce 2 pair, and he says I'm good. The next hand, I'm on the button, and there are 4 limps to me. This is probably a raise here. It's on the bottom end, but this hand is playable, and we are in position. I instead limp, and we end up going 7 ways to a flop of Queen 7-3 with 2 spades. It's checked to the player in seat 6, who now fires a massive single red chip bet of $5, and the guy on my right calls. Nah, I've got top 2 and a flush draw here, so let's get more of the pot. I go ahead and raise to 35, expecting more action from these guys, but sadly everybody folds. Looking down at King, Queen, Queen 4, 2 clubs, we see the usual limp fest in front of me, and I oblige from late position. With a flop of Queen, Jack 4, 2 diamonds, I flop top set. Let's get paid, baby. It's checked to me, and I go ahead and pot it to 35, which sees 2 calls. With 140 in, we see a turn of the 9 of diamonds. Yuck. That's the last card I wanted to see. It's checked to me, and I go ahead and check it back. The river brings in another diamond, but ew. It's checked around again, and the first player to act rolls over the nut flush. Spidey senses were right, and I am happy I did not fire this river. These Bombpots happen every dealer change in Orange City, so if you like them, you know where to go. In this hand, I look down at King 884 with a couple of hearts, and we see flops of 4 King 9 Rainbow on top and 7 King 4 Rainbow on bottom. Cool, 2 pair on both boards. We're strong, but this is a way ahead, way behind situation, times 2, and it's hard for us to improve on future streets on either board. I check when checked to, and it's checked around. The turns are the 10 of clubs on top and the 9 of diamonds on bottom. It's checked around to a late position player who bets 50 and 120. The guy on my right calls, I call, and one other guy calls too. The rivers are the 3 of clubs on top and the king of spades on bottom. And I have the nuts there. Now, how much do I bet? $50. Why? I want as many calls as possible, as well as to try and induce a race. I do get 2 calls, and I end up chopping this up with seat 1. The next hand is sort of marginal. It's more or less 2 hold'em hands, but it has some connectivity. There's a button straddle, and the small blind now raises to 15. The big blind calls, I call, and 4 more people call too. With 105 in, we see a flop of 7-7 king, and we flop number 2. It's checked to me, and I bet 50, which only sees the original razor call. The turn is a jack, and our opponent checks. I don't see this card helping him, so I go ahead and bet $100, and he comes along. The river is a blank, our opponent checks, and I bet $100 for value. Our opponent now check raises to 400, most of what I have left. I ended up making this call sort of quickly, and in doing so, committed some pretty serious blunders. Most well-known, obviously, being never get into a land war in Asia, but at least slightly less well-known is this. A check raise in the river is usually the nuts. Thinking back on this hand, I really like the way my opponent played this hand. He got maximum value from me, and it reminded me of some of the hands I've played in that manner. Fortunately, this has left me pretty short stacked, and I need to have a lot of work to do if I'm going to try to get back to even, let alone try to make a positive $2,000 run. Folded my big blind, but now see this wonderful hand in the small blind. The Limb Fest continues, and I call to go 5 ways to a flop of Ace-5-7 Rainbow. I only have one spade, but I have a wrap. I go ahead and lead for 25, and I get 2 calls. The turn is the king of clubs, and that's not what I wanted. Gold equity, right? I'm all in for $41, and I get 1 call. Can we get a miracle river card? How about an 8 of clubs? I announce straight, and we're good. Back up to over $200. Oh yeah. Here we go, a super premium hand, Ace King Jack 5 double suited. There are 3 limps to me, and I go ahead and pot it to 35, which sees 3 calls. With $145 in, we see a flop of 8-5-4 all hearts. I flopped the second nut flush, even recognizing that there's a straight flush out there. It's the king high flush, and I'm first to act with $140, so I go ahead and jam it in there. Looking over to see the nonchalant call from seat 3, and then another call from my right, I'm pretty sure that I'm beat already. The other 2 players get it in on the turn, and I am all done for this session, as sure enough, seat 3 does have the nut flush, and I am drawing dead. So, that was a massive roller coaster that ended pretty poorly. As I look back on that massive hand I lost, I keep thinking about how I again ignored the thought that they are never taking this action without a massive hand, especially when the guy hasn't shown any aggression whatsoever since he sat down. There's never a bluff there, and we have to listen to ourselves when we ask what value hands we beat that takes this action, and we come up empty. It's a massive mistake that made the difference between an even session and a loss, or from being able to run a good-sized stack back up from the crumbs that were left. Getting back to the poll from earlier, I was a bit surprised to see so many people indicate they didn't like seeing the hands I folded. It seems to be a polarizing issue for some, and I hope it isn't a deal breaker. There's a bit of work that goes into keeping these in the production, both between hands and in a montage format, so it may be something I only do on occasion, or as long as I don't find it too cumbersome. While I want to be able to appease the masses here, I'm doing the things I love and sharing my experiences, so I'm going to do what feels good and remains practical, so hopefully you all continue to enjoy what I do. One last thing, while we're still working out the details, I had a great conversation with Rec Poker Jim about working with Rec Poker as a member of the Wrecking Crew. While details still need to be worked out, I have started working on some introductory PLO content designed for no-limit hold'em players looking to transition to PLO, to make these concepts easier to learn. It's intended to be for Rec Poker members only, so I encourage you to check them out as there's a lot of really cool stuff coming in the next couple of months. Get in there and join the Discord and start interacting with all the fantastic humans who share your passion for poker and for life. I appreciate all of you spending some time with me as always. I'm Joey Pigtails, and I am transparent, reminding you to be a good human. Bye!